Howdy, folks. This is Fuzzy Road to Health, and I'm Fuzzy D, also known as David. So today we've got a very special guest. She's had an absolutely incredible journey. She had absolute decades, I think about 40 years or so, of severe mental illness, and along with that came anorexia, which was kind of one of the worst ones, as well as a ton of other physical and mental health issues. She had a pretty horrible life for decades, and eventually she found through proper diet a way to heal everything. So I'd like you all to meet Valerie Smith.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you, David. And thank you for asking me to come on and talk to your audience. I appreciate that. You are very, very correct. I lived a lifetime of severe mental illness. As far back as I can remember. There are many people that can look back in the history of their life and say, oh, I wish I could go back to my teens, or I wish I could go back to my 20s. That's where I felt my best. And they long to get back to the good health that they experienced at one time in their life. And I actually don't have that. My earliest memories go back to being 3, 4, and 5 years old. And I was already unwell. I was already plagued with anxiety and sadness and depression at that age. I was experiencing night terrors and sleepwalking and disrupted sleep and immune system issues and a lot of antibiotics. And I those are my earliest memories. I really don't have any memories of ever really being well. And it continued on past that. So as I got a little older, into pre-adolescence, 10, 12 years old, the anxiety and depression grew worse, and I was also diagnosed with OCD at that point. Things were kind of spiraling out of control, and I was having some intrusive thoughts, and I was experiencing the classic symptoms of OCD. I was doing a lot of body checking and counting, and I couldn't relax until I had completed a number of tasks. And then when my teen years started, I not only had those 3 things, I began to hear incessant voices, which was later, as 12 and 13 years old, diagnosed as schizoaffective disorder. This was devastating. This was complete turmoil that never lowered, never left. And as the years went on, it became more violent and harder for me to control, harder for me to deal with the psychotic breaks and the delusions and the break from reality that I would experience from these episodes of psychosis. And all along the way, the voices screamed at me to harm myself and to harm my family and to harm others. There was an element of paranoia, thinking that other people were plotting against me, that they were talking about me, that they had harm or violence for me. It was very difficult. And at that same time, the desire for self-harm, the self-punishment, developed into anorexia. And so I began starving myself as a way of controlling this out of control life that I was living. And of course, that wasn't the answer to my issues either. My family began to get alarmed as my weight started to drop. I'm 5'9", and in my teens, I was somewhere around 130 pounds. I was not what you would consider overweight, but I was already plagued with body dysmorphia. So when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone that was very obese. And And combining that with the messaging I was getting through the schizophrenia, it just spiraled out of control. And my family didn't know the extent of my thoughts, the voices, but when I was losing weight, they could clearly see that things were going wrong because it was visual, because it was something that they could see. And so that was when I began my 40 years of being under medical traditional treatment that included a lot of hospitalizations, a lot of inpatient, a lot of double lockdown units, whether it be in mental wards or isolated completely in an eating disorder unit just reserved for those with eating disorders, a lot of surgeries, a lot of medications, a lot of psychiatrists. I had over a dozen psychiatrists that I would in and out, have one, and that relationship would be severed because I was considered treatment resistant and they didn't know what else to do for me and they would pass me off to someone else. There were a lot of medications, a lot of psychotic meds that were thrown at this, combinations of SSRIs, antidepressants, old ones as well as newly developed ones that were specifically targeted towards the schizoaffective disorder to quiet the voices, and some for anxiety and panic attacks. So there was usually like a mix of 2 to 4 that I was on at a time, and then they would take one away and add 2, and take 2 away and add 1, trying to find some sort of combination that would reduce my symptoms at all. And it never did. I never got any benefit from any mental health standpoint. That's all I developed was side effects, terrible side effects from all of them. And eventually, at the 30-year mark, titrated myself off of them because I was functioning worse on them than I was off of them. The devastation of feeling sedated and flat and like a zombie was making it even harder to stay present in reality with my family. I was just a zombie, and those medications made it worse. I managed to graduate from high school, attempted college. I ended up quitting college after 2 years. My health continued to decline, and I was at that point at 20, less than 100 pounds, and hospitalized. They would pump me full of nasogastric feeding tube ingredients, which are high fructose corn syrup, canola oil, and soy, which is what is in the over-the-counter Ensure and Boost drinks that we feed children, teens, adults, elderly, the same awful inflammatory ingredients, and that was what was put through my feeding tube.
Yeah, that
it's awful.
Yeah, the liquid diet stuff. I mean, I had myasthenia gravis. I was bedridden from that, as well as a bunch of other autoimmune diseases, and I had gotten to a point where I couldn't swallow solid food, so I started using one of those liquid diets. I think it was like the carnation meal replacement powder that you mix in with milk.
Yes.
Having no idea that I was making my condition worse.
Right.
Doing that.
Right.
Those meal replacements, they don't have a clue what actual nutrition is all about.
They definitely don't. And, the hospitals have contracts with these big food corporations to supply them with these liquid meal replacements. And the doctors themselves don't look into it either. They see it as total nutrition in terms of high calorie. And they don't actually look at it from a bioavailable nutrition standpoint. It's just, for them, it's just about the calories that they can pump into someone. And, what I've experienced, calories are calories. They won't acknowledge that different foods and different nutrients feed the body and the brain in a different way. Certain ones heal and certain ones harm. And yeah, it's a devastating discovery when you realize that that's making you worse instead of better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but when I got into this, like I've been carnivore for about 18 months, something like that. And I know the first few months that I got into it, and started really researching and studying and finding out about all the corruption and everything in our food system and our drug system. And that kind of made me depressed and angry for a couple of months until I kind of came to terms with what they were doing and taking responsibility for myself rather than trying to blame others. And
I as well. I can understand that frustration and that anger. I went through that as well. There's that angerness and that bitterness can overtake you, and I had to process it as well. I had to like sit in my anger and go through that process, almost like a grief process when someone passes away. It was a stage of healing where I really needed to feel that anger to propel me to realize that no one was coming to save me, that I had to do this myself. And then if I did this myself, I could then be a help to someone else. And so I let that anger drive me to use it for good. And I like the phrase, you can either choose to be bitter or choose to be better. So even though I went through that anger stage, I needed to get to a place where I could put it to rest and finally come to a place where I gave the pharmaceutical industry, I gave the medical community, I gave the lack of nutrition and the inflammatory foods, I gave them enough of my life. And if I continue to stay angry and not learn how to use it for good, I'm just giving them more power. They still have control over my life, and I refuse to do that anymore. I want to live in joy. I want to live in vibrant health, and I want to be of service to others. And yeah, I finally had to process that frustration and that anger and try to put it aside so that we could all go forward and help others.
Yeah, and I think that's been one of the biggest turning points for me is when I first started, I was angry and I was hurt, looking at, how much of my life I'd lost because of all this, 10 years bedridden and in a wheelchair before that for a while. And, all the things I had lost. But then I started focusing on all the things that I had gained. I'd gained this new knowledge and I'd gained a lot of experience and a lot of empathy. And I gained a new purpose. My new purpose, very similar to yours, to help other people try and find healing, to get the word out about the role of food in our health. And I'm not going to sit here and tell people that that life has been a bed of roses since I went carnivore. It certainly hasn't. I've healed a ton of stuff. But I've also had, some other long-standing issues that have been kind of hidden by everything else that came up to the front that I have to deal with now. So I'm still facing a few surgeries, and here in Canada, it can take a while to get through some of that stuff. Our medical system is really backed up right now, lack of doctors, and it takes me a month just to get an appointment to see my family doctor. So.
Wow.
And I've been on the waiting list to see a surgeon for my neck. I'm supposed to get neck surgery. I've been on the waiting list for that for at least 5 months, and I'm probably looking at the end of the year before I get to see him. So.
Yeah, the U.S. doesn't have a great healthcare system. I mean, we have it. I'd rather call it a sick care system. I'll use it if I have trauma now. That but I have no desire to plop myself down and just for a checkup. But boy, if I needed to get in to be seen by someone, I'm thankful that I wouldn't have to wait 5 months for a specialist like yourself or a month to see my primary care physician. I think we can get in to see someone faster than those in Canada, but you know, what's the point of it being fast if it's not quality? You know, if you're not really going to get help, real help, rather than here's a pill and we don't know what to do for you. You know, in that sense, getting in there to see somebody fast is not necessarily going to solve anything, but it is something. You know, you at least get to move forward with working on the issues that still continue to need.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, the other thing too is, you know, sometimes you need to get to a doctor to have them find out what the issue is.
Right.
Yeah, especially when it comes to more mechanical stuff, you know, like physical damage left over from disease and stuff like that.
Yes.
You know, they're good at finding that and you know, telling you about it and dealing with it. You know, that kind of stuff they're pretty good at. But you know, you have to be able to get that information from them. And a lot of times the doctor will find an issue and he'll tell me what it is, and then I'll find a natural remedy for it instead of medications. And much to the frustration of my doctor, I think he's making noises like he wants me to find a new doctor. But in Canada, it's not that easy. If you've already got one, when a new doctor comes into town, he doesn't want to take on anyone who's already got a doctor. So it can make it really difficult to try and switch doctors to find a better one. So
yeah, and I am much the same. I do the same thing. I'll use a doctor to get a diagnosis, but I don't necessarily jump on the bandwagon with what they want me to do to solve it, because they're not treating the root cause. I will then take that diagnosis and research it myself and find the root cause and heal it from the inside out. And yeah, I've done that with my daughter with Tourette's syndrome. I've done that with my husband, who came down with a severe case of shingles 8 years ago. And you know, neither diagnosis was helped by what the doctors wanted us to do or whatever, or what they were offering that could help or not help. I had to take matters into my own hands and fight back and get them both to great health again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I had one message to pass on to people is you need to take your health into your own hands. That's just it's the way it is. If you don't advocate for yourself and do your own research, you know, you could be stuck for a long time. You know, like yes. I was stuck for many years because I was relying on the doctors to do something, to come up with some new treatment. And, you know, I was always seeking out new specialists and, you know, looking for new medical interventions. And, you know, there was nothing. They just couldn't help me because of the, you know, both mental illness and autoimmune disease are really difficult for them to do anything with long-term successfully, from what I've seen. And, you know, I mean, I had my issues with mental illness as well. When I was 19, I was diagnosed as manic depressive, which nowadays they call bipolar.
Yes.
And I was fairly bad, but it was fairly easily treatable. I mean, you know, they put me on lithium and it did balance me out, but it had some other negative side effects that I didn't like. You know, it gave me brain fog, and it just, you know, I wasn't able to think clearly. I wasn't able to feel clearly, which was really strange sensation for me. And so I stopped taking it, and I didn't take it for decades. I didn't take any medication. And then carnivore, it took a while, but about 4 months in on carnivore, I noticed that the symptoms were getting less and less. And by 6 months, I noticed I hadn't had an episode in a while, and I haven't had one since. So
yeah, that's just the power of proper human diet to actually mitigate brain chemistry. It's just absolutely amazing. It's just transformational, and it changes every facet of your entire life when your brain dysfunction is healed. It's amazing. Mm-hmm.
So how was it that you kind of got on to the whole concept of carnivore, and how did you transition to? Because I know, like, I dated a woman with that was anorexic back when I was like 19, and I saw some of the struggles that she went through with it. So I guess one of my big questions is, how did you adapt to switching to eating something that you probably didn't really like that much, and how did you start increasing the amounts that you were eating to really optimize your nutritional levels?
It was very difficult. Like you, at the beginning, in my 20s and 30s, I thought the answer was to just double down and do more of traditional therapy. I quit college. I only worked part-time so I could devote myself to more therapy sessions, more time with dietitians. I thought that if I devoted more time to it, that was going to be my answer, to just invest more time in going to the doctors that said that they could help me recover. And of course, that's not what happened. It's none of it ever helped. They were coming from the standpoint of anorexia being simply a weight and a food issue, not a metabolic brain dysfunction issue, not an actual mental illness where your brain is misfiring and is starving for the nutrients needed to think cognitively clearly. And so all of these therapies just had to do with learning to eat your fear foods, learning to eat pizza, learning to eat pasta. And that fundamental idea, combined with the food pyramid, combined with a plant-based diet being pushed, played right into how I already was, because the first thing that I eliminated at 12 years old was protein and fat. I was already just living on fruits and vegetables. And depending on the season of life I was living, tiny amounts. There were decades that I teetered right around 70 pounds, and I should not be alive. I have had so many near-death close calls. It's just, I was being protected. I was being kept alive by God until I could find my healing. But that's all we knew, was just to do more traditional treatment and to do it better and do it harder and take more meds and look for another way to keep doing this. So by the time I got to my 30s, I knew that traditional treatment was not going to do anything for me. They had nothing left to throw at this. There was no more meds to try. There were no more psychiatrists that had any more ideas. My last one, in my late 30s, he basically fired me and said, don't come back. You're treatment resistant. You just need to accept that this is incurable. These 6 diagnoses that you have, there's nothing we can do. This is the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. And you can try to recover and get better a little bit, but it will always be there, and you'll always be in jeopardy, per se, of a relapse, and especially with my anorexia, which is what I did my entire life. I would use the plant-based diet and the menus they gave me and eat oatmeal and eat sweet potatoes and eat rice cakes and eat fruits and vegetables and get a little better in a higher weight, because I was gaining weight on the carbs, but nothing ever changed mentally. And so then I would quickly relapse and go back to just eating a cupful of spinach every day with nothing else. And that's how I would teeter back and forth for years. So when I made it to being 40, the decades of mental illness and starvation took its toll physically. And I began to have serious major medical complications. I had 7 surgeries within 15 years to try to correct what was happening to my body because of the malnutrition. And by the time I got to be 45 in 2015, I had gotten to the point where I had had severe osteoporosis since the age of 16. And prior to being 45, those last 5 years, I endured 5 fractures within 5 years. I was constantly bedbound, housebound, using a walker, using crutches, having braces on my arms and legs, having casts on my arms and legs, and I had chronic, constant bone pain all over my body from the osteoporosis, let alone the fractures. And on top of that, my internal organs began failing because of starvation and because of loss of musculature. When you're that skeletal, when you're 5'9" and 70 pounds, you've not only lost all of your external skeletal muscle, you've also lost internal musculature that is built into your surrounding your organs to hold organs in place. And I had also lost all of that. So I had multiple organ prolapses that could only be fixed through multiple long, extensive surgeries. Some of it involved removal of organs. Some of it involved repair and trying to put back in place the best that they could.
So for our users who don't know, what does prolapse mean? What's happening there?
Okay. What is happening is in my case specifically, it was my colon, my uterus, and my bladder. Those 3 organs had fallen out of position where they normally reside in your pelvic cavity. There was no muscle to hold them in place. There was no fascia, and everything interconnected needed to hold them where they're supposed to be held. And so in me, they not only prolapsed internally, which caused a great deal of abdominal pain and pressure when trying to urinate and have a bowel movement. Mine were so severe that when I stood up, they also prolapsed externally out of my body. And it was absolutely devastating. And it took a series of specialists to diagnose it all. At first, they thought it was just my colon, and then they did more extensive testing and found that the same thing had happened to my uterus and my bladder. And it's something that usually happens to the elderly when they've gone through a decade or 2 of sarcopenia, and the muscle loss that happens to the elderly because they are not weight training, they are not consuming enough protein, and their muscles start to waste away. And it's that kind of prolapse is usually seen in the elderly. And of course, I was nowhere near that. I was 40 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the medical complications that were going on were devastating. And I faced a lifetime of that. That was going to continue. I was going to continue to have fractures. I was going to continue to have something go wrong medically that was going to need surgical intervention. My thyroid and all of my hormones were completely messed up. I had IBS, I had GERD, I had all of these issues. I also had interstitial cystitis. I had chronic urinary tract infections, kidney infections, which I later learned were from high oxalate vegetables that I was living off of, over consuming them. Those diagnoses were told to me to be incurable also, but there's nothing they can do about them. And of course, I don't have those anymore either. So those medical complications, along with the mental illnesses that were not being helped at all by traditional therapy. I had had decades of talk therapy. I had worked through my childhood. I had worked through what they targeted as the cause of this, and it never made a difference in my mental illnesses at all. This was a brain dysfunction. So I was not going to go back into traditional treatment. I was not going to seek out another psychiatrist and do this anymore. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I was done. I was fed up and I was done. And I also knew that I wasn't going to make it another year. I wasn't going to survive. I was now praying to not wake up anymore. Sleep was my only escape from the schizoaffective voices. And I just didn't want to be here anymore. I really didn't. I didn't necessarily want to take my own life and leave my family to mitigate that, to deal with that, but I did not want to be here anymore. Life was unlivable. Life was so incredibly painful just to get through a 24-hour period. At this time, I started to look into brain neurology, brain health, from the standpoint of the over 100 neurotransmitters that are in our brain, and what does the brain need for those neurotransmitters to develop, to grow, to make them. And I found a couple of books at the library by an author named Julia Ross. Her two books, called The Mood Cure and The Diet Cure, introduced me to this whole concept that the amino acids that are in animal foods are superior, and that is what will make the abundance of neurotransmitters in your brain to heal brain dysfunction. And if you don't have those building blocks, you're going to have mental problems. And at the point that I read these books, I had not eaten any protein or fat for 35 years. Not an egg, not a bite of chicken, nothing. And
wow. No wonder your body was rebelling.
Oh my goodness, yes. And at the time that I found those books and read those books, TED Talks on YouTube were popular. And so I decided to do a search and see who else is talking about this. Is there anyone else besides this author that I can learn from? Is there anything to this? Could this possibly be true? And that is when I found my heroes, Dr. Georgia Ede and Dr. Chris Palmer. You know, we now know them as the authors to their new books, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, and Brain Energy. Back then, in 2017, when I found them, I found just their early writings online, their papers that they'd written, their websites that they had, and small tidbits of TED Talks and YouTube interviews where they talked about this, where I could use that new information coming in to spark in me the drive to try one more time. That you know, this was it. This was going to probably be the last thing, because there really wasn't anything else left. And it took me several months of just thinking about this, gaining more knowledge, reading more. At the time that I was thinking about this, talking about it with my husband, I also found Dr. Ken Berry and Dr. Sean Baker and Dr. Anthony Chafee, Dr. Eric Berg. I combined all of this and really spent time thinking about if this is true, and I could possibly be some better, even 10%, for the rest of my life to get through living, which I never in my wildest dreams ever thought that I could be healed. I was just grabbing at anything that could make my hour by hour existence better. So then I had to figure out, how am I going to do this? I was not a person that was eating a full plate of food, full meals, the full standard American diet, any kind of full caloric intake in order to trade that for meat and eggs. That's all I was eating was a cup of spinach and a cup of lettuce. So that part of my journey is slow. The first 6 months that I implemented this, I literally was doing this one bite at a time. I could not sit down to a 4-ounce piece of chicken. I could not sit down and eat any sort of tallow or butter or anything. I had a complete aversion to oils and fat and meat, believing that they were bad for me, believing that they would poison me, believing that I didn't need them because I had been brainwashed to believe that a plant-based diet was all you needed, that was what was going to make you the healthiest. And so I had to unlearn all of these lies that I had believed, plus put myself on an organized plan so that I would not backslide and go bite by bite. And when I got used to that bite of chicken, promised myself that the next week I would double it. And then in another week, I would double it again. So 1 ounce became 2, and 2 ounces became 3, and 3 ounces became 4. And when I did it that way, I was able to slowly see change. I was able to slowly see less frequent panic attacks, less anxiety, less depression. The OCD that had gotten to a critical point, because at this point I was now cutting my arms and legs, and I was also plagued with a condition called trichotillomania, where I was pulling out my scalp hair and my eyebrows and eyelashes. It was uncontrollable. We have control over our hands, and I would get up every day and say, I'm not going to do this ever again. But that part of OCD is metabolic brain dysfunction. And by the time I would go a day or 2 days, I literally could not control it. It had control over me, and that craving, that urge to self-punish would not leave until I gave in. And then it would subside, and then it would build again in 2 days. So they're not just habits that you can trade it for something else and just walk away from. It's an actual brain dysfunction. And I was noticing that was lessening and becoming more infrequent. At the 6-month mark, where I feel that I finally got to what a normal serving of meat would be on someone who's not on a carnivore diet, a tiny 8-ounce serving that, we eat way more than that on a carnivore diet, but that's kind of a regular serving for someone that's on a standard American diet. When I got to that amount, I started to see for the first time in my life an audible reduction in the level of the schizophrenia voices. They were still there.
How long did it take you to get to that point from the time you started shifting to carnivore? How long did it take you before you were full carnivore? 6 months?
6 months, yes. At 6 months, I had finally gotten up to 8 ounces of meat, and I had learned about the lion diet, and I had eliminated the celery and the spinach and the lettuce to get the most healing. And that was when I first started to notice that the voices that were so loud were still there, and 24 hours a day, still screaming the same messaging, but they now felt like they were in another room with the door closed. They were muffled. And I'd never experienced that in my entire life. There was nothing that I had ever taken or done that had gotten me to that reduction. So this was extremely exciting. And even if I had never gotten any better than what I'd gotten to at that 6-month mark, I was going to be thankful. But I kept going. Back then, no one was saying, do it for 30 days, do it for 60 days. I didn't have myself on a timetable. This was all I had left. And I was going to do this unless and until I didn't survive, I guess. If I'd never gotten to a point where I had healed enough to then put on weight. So the 9-month mark, I continued to increase my amount of meat. I was able to switch over to fatty cuts of meat at that point, chuck roasts in the crock pot, fattier cuts of steak, fattier profiles of ground beef. My brain was starting to wake up, and I was able to make different choices in my foods because I no longer felt threatened by them because my brain was starting to work correctly. The brain fog was leaving, and joy was returning. So the 9-month mark, there was more healing, and then between 9 months and 12 months, oh my goodness, I was like on a marathon for healing. I was then up to over a pound of red meat a day with unrefined mineral salt and water. And at the 1-year mark, everything was completely, permanently gone. I've not heard a single schizophrenic voice since then, since 2000. It's just unbelievable. No depression, no anxiety, no panic attacks. I've not cut myself since then. I've not pulled a hair or an eyebrow or an eyelash since then. And the anorexia, at that point, at that 12-month mark, no one can come to me and say, you got better because you gained weight. I had not gained anything yet. I had done this so slowly that it revved up my metabolism. And as I learned to burn more food, my metabolism raised. And so even though I was eating a lot more than what I was previously, I hadn't gained any weight yet. It took a real targeted approach and an abundance, large amounts of food in my 2nd year to then put weight on. But weight gain in and of itself, especially through carbs, especially through ultra-processed food, especially through seed oils, that will not heal anorexia. No. Nutrient-dense animal foods heal the mental illness of anorexia. And so then, since the anorexia is completely gone, there's no drive to starve, there's no aversion to any food, there's no looking in the mirror and seeing someone who's obese. It's completely gone. There was no fear of gaining weight. I now could look at how bad I looked in the mirror and say, oh my gosh, I have to rebuild. I have to do something. How am I still alive? I was just skeletal. And the 2nd year was when I spent every day learning how to increase my food even more, how to slowly learn how to weight train, to put muscle on, to change my body composition. And of course, lifting weights also was part of my protocol to reverse my low thyroid and my osteoporosis. Both of those need protein, fat, and weight-bearing exercise to reverse. And the healing has just continued. I mean, all of that healed. All of my oxalate illnesses healed. I no longer have IBS, GERD, all of those issues from the high oxalate vegetables I don't have anymore. And I'm now almost 7 years healed. And even now, I can look back a year ago, even though everything was completely healed years ago, I can still look back a year ago and say, you know what? I feel even stronger and younger this year than I did last year. So the benefits continue. You know, it doesn't ever just stay stagnant. And you don't know how good you can feel until you realize how
Yeah.
badly you felt. It's just phenomenal. So now I am passionate to spread this message as far and as wide as I can by doing interviews with great podcasters like yourself. I've now done, you were number 30. You're number 30 interview. And I have become active on social media at an older age because I'm 54. I had not been on social media prior to my healing. You know, we can't necessarily change things right away from the top down. I tried. I went back to some of my doctors, hoping that they would want to know how I healed in order to help their other patients. We assume that. We assume that they want to gain new knowledge.
I did too.
And it was not a good encounter. It was not good. They were very condescending to me. They, one of the doctors said that carnivore was just masking my symptoms and that I was going to have a psychotic break and I needed to get back under treatment and go back on my meds. And the other one that I went back to said that I was experiencing a placebo effect and that this was going to end and I was going to be sicker than I was before. So I stopped going back to those doctors and I said, okay, we're going to do this from person to person. I'm going to spread this message as far and as wide as I can at the citizen level, through social media, through interviews, through anything I possibly can, speaking at retreats, and then most recently becoming a metabolic health coach, so that those who want a regular access, regular appointment to work on their mental health, work on their diet, work on whatever it is, their macros, helping them figure out whether they're eating enough, whether they're eating the right things, deal with their illnesses, give them suggestions of what might help them further if they've gotten to a certain level of healing on a certain range of a ketogenic diet, because we know that there's a range. There's keto, there's ketovore, there's carnivore, there's lion diet, there's low carb, and all of those are useful tools for certain people. And sometimes they can heal everything that they want to by choosing one of those, and they don't need to go more strict. I always say that we only need to go as strict as our illnesses dictate. I had to go all the way. I had lingering illness that was not going to be fixed or healed if I had stayed on a ketogenic diet, including those vegetables that were harming me. I needed to go further to eliminate those plant toxins and those anti-nutrients to really get to the level of healing that I got to. So I am a big advocate in coming alongside whoever comes to me and just help them figure out what is going to make them be their best self, not by a list of rules, but by figuring out what foods help them and what foods harm them, and come up with a personal plan that works for them.
Yeah, I was really shocked myself when I went back to talk to my doctors about what this diet had done for me. And my family doctor especially, he had seen me lose he hadn't seen me lose all my weight because I had already been losing by the time I switched to him. But he could look at my records and see that I'd lost over 220 pounds and all my autoimmune stuff was in remission. And he's sitting there trying to tell me that carnivore diet isn't sustainable and it's dangerous. And, and he was running all these blood tests and, trying to push all these drugs on me, statins and stuff. Because, of course, as a carnivore, my cholesterol went up.
Right, yes.
And,
Yeah.
and it stayed pretty high for a while until my body kind of adjusted and learned how to deal with stuff better.
Right.
And then I also made some minor changes. I started taking some mineral supplements. I've got a bad thyroid, so he was trying to push drugs on me for that too. My thyroid was really, really bad.
Yeah.
And But I found some natural remedy for that, just the right combination of minerals and stuff.
Me too. Yeah, me,
And
me as
yeah,
well.
yeah, and that fixed me right up. And he's seeing all this, and he's seeing me. He's seeing all these health issues I used to have, and they're all gone away. I feel better than I have in 30 plus years. And he's trying to tell me that I'm following a dangerous diet, that, it's not sustainable, that I don't know what I'm doing, and that I shouldn't be teaching it to other people because I'm just going to hurt them. And
it's infuriating, isn't it? It's just, to think, you lost the weight of an entire other person.
yeah,
220 pounds, that's what my husband weighs. You lost an entire person. And how can a doctor look at that and look at other biomarkers that show your autoimmune, being in remission, and your blood work coming back from being bad, and it's now showing good markers, and to be a naysayer, to be contrarian to that, and to tell, it's just so frustrating.
Oh, I know. I mean, even things like A1C. I mean, when they were getting pretty worried before I started doing the keto, and then I went to carnivore later.
I bet.
And my A1C had gone up. I think one time they tested it was 6.7, but it was usually around 6.4, 6.5.
Yeah.
So that's right in type 2 territory.
Yes,
and
it is. Yes.
And within about 6 months, so they did, like, after I started carnivore, they'll only test A1C every 3 months, of course. But yeah, then it went down to 5.7, and then 5.4, and then I think right now I'm hovering at about 4.8, 4.9 A1C.
Wow.
And
yeah. So how can anybody look at those concrete numbers on paper and say this is not sustainable and this is dangerous? It just.
I know, and part of the problem that this doctor communicated to me was that, here in Canada, well, and in the province of Alberta where I live, they have, they're kind of controlled by what they can and can't do by the Alberta College of Physicians, or the Alberta Medical Association, I guess is what it is. And they can even tell them what research materials they're allowed to study. So, when I tried showing him the actual randomized control trial studies that prove everything I was trying to tell him, he wouldn't read them. He wouldn't read them, and he wasn't allowed to read them.
Oh,
and I found that really alarming.
That is.
That's
very alarming.
Yeah.
That they not only don't have access to actual truth, but even if they wanted to, they're being prevented from. Yeah, they're being shadowed. They're being prevented from even seeing both sides. I mean, that's what informed consent is supposed to be. We're supposed to, we as citizens, and them also as doctors, are supposed to be able to have all of the facts and all of the information in order for us to make an informed decision about the risks versus the benefits of any treatment, whether it be drugs or therapy or diet, nutrition. And if you don't even have access or allowed to have access to the full picture, you're not going to be able to help your patients, and you're not going to be able to, as a citizen, find something that's going to heal yourself.
Yeah, and then, as a doctor, when they're seeing patients come to them with amazing healing, and then they want to just dismiss it because it doesn't agree with their worldview, it's a really sad statement on where a lot of our medical profession is. It's been very gratifying to see doctors like Dr. Barry and Dr. Chafee and Dr. Baker and Dr. Kiltz, I love Dr. Kiltz. I finally met him in person at the last KetoCon in down in Austin, and he's got this natural ability when you talk to him, he makes you feel like the most important, valuable person in the world. It's amazing.
Oh, I agree. It's completely infectious. I went on what they called Meat Stock 2024, and it was a carnivore retreat in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, at the end of April this year. And Dr. Kiltz was there in our 4-day retreat. I got to meet my heroes. I got to be with Dr. Sean Baker and work out with him and eat with him. And Dr. Kiltz was there. And it's just infectious. He comes up and gives you a hug and has no idea who you are. And he will come and sit with you one-on-one and really pay attention to you. He's not distracted. You know, he looks you in the eyes and wants to know what you've been through. And, you know, he and I became fast friends, you know, at that retreat. And I was just on his podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he's just amazing. Yeah, I can't stop talking about Dr. Kiltz.
Yeah, I just watched that interview yesterday. So, yeah, I'd seen a couple others of yours previously, but I hadn't seen that one yet.
Yeah. He's just amazing. And I agree. I'm so thankful that even though we're frustrated with our real life doctors, we at least have all of these doctors in our arsenal now, like we just mentioned, and other ones, you know, Dr. Philip Ovadia and Dr. Sean O'Mara, and all of these doctors that are coming out and saying, I used to doctor this way. I myself was not well. I ate the standard American diet. I instructed my patients to just follow the guidelines and eat more salads and eat more chicken and eat more grains and eat more bread. And I love it when a doctor can come back and say, you know what? I was wrong. I've learned the truth now. I've proven it to myself by healing myself, and I'm now ready to talk to my patients and advocate for this. I absolutely love it when a doctor is humble enough to put their ego aside and say, I have learned something new, and I was wrong when I followed the guidelines and when I, you know, was caught by the medical system and caught by big pharma. I think it's very, very helpful for us to have all of these doctors that are coming alongside us to be a resource, and they have gone through it themselves and healed their own health. So, you know, that's why it is so important for everyone to share their stories, because I think we have a voice with people because we've lived through it ourselves. We can have so much sympathy and empathy for others who are suffering and come alongside them and say, I truly know how you're feeling. I truly know how you're suffering. I was there once also. And it gives us a real voice of compassion when others know what we've been through, but we've also come out on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know one of the things that I've been really impressed with seeing, it's fairly new, but in just a little bit before the Hack Your Health this year, or KetoCon, Dr. Sean Baker and his group, they got the Rivero Health off the ground.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
I know, it's so amazing. Yeah. I've been, you know, anxiously awaiting for that to launch, and for him to talk about, you know, all the different clinicians that he's hiring and how many states it will be in, and to be able to refer people to that, send them, you know, in a message, the website where they can actually click on it and make an appointment. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely love what he's doing. We really need somebody here in Canada to do the same thing, kind of an independent operation like that. But,
yes. Hopefully sometime soon in the future it will happen for you.
Yeah. So what have you got going on in your life right now? What do you got coming up? What things are you doing right now?
of course, still busy doing interviews. A week from today, I am going to be on with Dr. Anthony Chafee. And so I am flabbergasted and excited about that one, to actually be able to talk to him one-on-one. So I'm excited about that. I am enjoying summer. I live in Ohio, and so June, July, and August, and early September are about the only months that I can really be warm and enjoy the sun and enjoy the heat. So I'm taking advantage of that, getting out and getting sun and enjoying the weather when I can, when I have the free time. I'm busy with clients in my coaching platform, and that is very rewarding. Being able to talk to someone one-on-one, like we're doing now, and help them take a look at what they're currently doing and make suggestions of how to get them to the next level of healing. It's really amazing to form those relationships. About 90% of what I do besides the coaching is just volunteer. I am busy on Twitter, X, if you want to call it X, and Instagram and Facebook. I get probably 20 direct messages every week on each platform of people asking for help for all different reasons. And so I enjoy researching for them if I don't know the answer, and pointing them into resources or previous posts that I've done that may help them. Busy doing that. In October, I'm going to a keto event in Louisville, Kentucky called Keto Palooza. And so I am looking forward to that. I'm going to meet the people at that one are different from the heroes that I met at the carnivore retreat I was on. So I'm going to get to meet Maria Emmerich. I'm going to get to meet Dr. Ken Berry and his wife, and Bronson Dant, and Ben Azadi, and a bunch of other people that are going to be at that keto conference. So I'm looking forward to that, making connections with more people. It's a large event that's held every year, and life is good. My husband and I just celebrated our 30th anniversary in June, and
Awesome.
of course, most of those years were difficult. When we made our vows to each other, I was very ill. And when we said, I do in sickness and in health, my husband knew it was going to be most likely in sickness. And for better or for worse, it was worse for a lot of years. And we love each other unconditionally, but there was a lot of frustration, a lot of tears, a lot of agony on my part and his part. He just wanted me to be well, and neither one of us knew how to get there. He was right there in the thick of things with me, trying to help me and to come alongside me and support me. And except for the last 7 years, it was difficult. So it's like we are newlyweds. Mental illness, it's not just a part of your life, it's your identity. It's who you are on every level. And when I was overtaken with all these mental illnesses, as I know you understand, it affects everything. I couldn't go to a restaurant on a date with my husband and sit across from him and share my day with him and share a meal with him. I was overwrought with anxiety and panic, and I couldn't eat anything except for a bowl of plain lettuce. And then the schizoaffective voices would have me being paranoid of who else was in the restaurant. It was impossible. Mental illness is just life-taking. It takes you down. It takes your life, and it affects every single person in your life. It destroys relationships. It's just awful. So the last 7 years have been an amazing time in our love to rekindle and redeem those years. We're having a very enjoyable time seeing how life should have been all along, you know,
Yeah.
as I'm sure you understand that life now, if it had been this all along, but like you said, life is not perfect. Oh my goodness. There's still illness, there's still frustrations, there's still stress in life, there's still things that go wrong. Your drain stops up, your car breaks down. But being in a better place with illness being in remission, with physical disease being in remission, those normal things that happen in life to everyone, I know at least for myself, it helps me handle them better because cognitively I can handle them better. I don't fall down into a pool of tears and panic anymore and not know how to get myself out of dealing with things the way that I used to deal with things. So, life is still stressful. Things go wrong. There are still things, that are wrong. But I've found that this way of eating puts us in such a cognitive benefit that it helps us to deal with those everyday things that happen.
Yeah, and I think I think we've got kind of similar stories in that our spouses have been a huge support
Yes.
and structure for us. I know my wife, she was my primary caregiver for about 15 years, and we've been married about a little over 27 years. And I mean, she basically lost her husband for 15 years.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I mean, I was sleeping 12 to 16 hours a day, and I was all medicated up, and I was on huge doses of morphine and other painkillers as well that I'd been on for a decade and a half. I'd been on opiates, and she stuck by me, and she was there for me. She looked after me, and she was absolutely amazed to get her husband back. When I started this healing journey, I mean, my journey started with keto because my first thing was to lose some weight after I got off the pain meds, and that's another story all on its own. But yeah, I mean, and when we were able to, when I had healed enough that we realized I wasn't going to ever need my wheelchair again, so we took that back. And then we moved from my wheelchair accessible apartment to a regular place.
Gosh.
And, just being able to, those huge milestones and changes in my life. And, my wife was there every step of the way. And I'm so grateful to her for her love and her loyalty and her patience. And, now, I mean, we kind of became more like roommates than husband and wife.
Right. Yes.
With all those years of sickness, and it was a long process to start building a whole new round of intimacy for us. But
Yes.
it's coming. I mean, we're in a way better place now than we were, a couple of years ago, or even 7 or 8 months ago. I mean, we've come a long way just in the last few months. But,
the same with me. Well, he was my caretaker. I couldn't even lift a piece of firewood to put it into the wood stove because we heat with wood. I couldn't carry laundry. I couldn't carry groceries. He was my caretaker, and truly, you and your wife are blessed to have each other. That is unconditional love. That is the epitome of unconditional love, of giving and not expecting anything in return, and just loving you.
Yeah, and I mean the stuff that she had to deal with my illness was pretty terrible. I mean, our illnesses were quite different, obviously, but I used to have, because the myasthenia gravis causes severe muscle weakness. So that part of your journey, I understand. The severe muscle weakness, different cause, but
right.
Yeah, it's so there were times when my bowels wouldn't work properly. I couldn't tighten a sphincter to keep it inside at times. So many times it didn't take long before we realized that we had to get rubber sheets for the bed and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, she was constantly cleaning up these kinds of messes and helping me to the bathroom to clean up and that kind of thing. And you know, for her to stick around,
Yeah.
and continue to be my wife is just an absolute testament to her character and who she is as a person.
I totally agree. My husband the same way. He could have said, "I can't handle any more of this. I can't, I can't do this anymore." He could have easily, decade after decade, said, "This is just, and also even saying, developed a cold heart. He could have closed himself off. He could have built such walls around himself that even after I got well, that maybe relationship wise, there was no coming back from that. But he didn't. His heart stayed tender, and he opened himself back up for us to rebuild our lives together, just like you have done. It's just amazing how blessed we are.
Yeah, I'm. I take some time every day at the end of my day and go over all the things I've got to be grateful for. Yeah, especially on days when I'm feeling bad, when I've been having a lot of pain, or I've been whatever, when it's just been a bad day. That doing that gratitude exercise makes such a huge difference. And I mean, the whole time I was sick, it was my normal operating procedure to just blame it all on the doctors, blame it on everyone else, anybody but me. And it wasn't until, even after I started healing, it wasn't until I made that switch and realized that, I've got to be responsible for my life. It's no one else's fault. It's my responsibility. And it's up to me to do something about it. And
Right.
Once I came to that realization, that's when things really started to change emotionally. It's different from mental and physical. That emotional component is.
Yes, I agree. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
experienced it as well.
I imagine you were probably on more medications than I was. I think I was on like 19 medications at what point. And being able to come off of all of those meds and feel better than I ever had was such an incredible process. And then it just started all this other stuff, working on my mental health and my emotional health, and then really delving into myself. I took some courses and spent some time and really went to town working on myself and learning how I tick
Right.
inside.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they miss out on that part of recovery. A lot of people, they go carnivore and they heal physically, and then they just kind of coast along after that, and they kind of get stuck. And I've met a few people that seem to be kind of stuck like that. They're not going to the next level now that they've healed the physical. They're not going on to heal everything else.
Right.
And I mean, we all have four main parts of us. We've got the physical part, the mental part, the emotional part, and the spiritual part.
Yes.
And we need to bring all of those into alignment and harmony.
Yes.
Before we're going to experience true happiness and joy that we're meant to. I mean, we were created to have joy and experience life. And for me,
all of those areas need to work together, and we need to use the cognitive resources we have now, being healed, through carnivore and healing our brains, to then start learning about ourselves and learning about the other different areas, the other 3 areas that we can use to make our life even better.
Yeah. Well, I want to say this has been a fantastic interview. I love hearing your story and the healing that you've experienced. And you've got an absolutely amazing and inspiring journey. And let's hope that we can continue to get this message out to people and to help other people have the same, to experience that healing.
Yeah, that's what I hope and pray for every day also, to just continue what we're doing and to continue to tell more people that they don't have to live in agony, in prison any longer. If they can just start, it's going to take time to heal, but the healing is there. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and speak with you, and I've been looking forward to it.
Well, it's been my absolute pleasure to have you. So I just want to say to the folks out there, if you, I've got some information up on the screen. I've got Valerie's Instagram address up on the screen there, so you can check her out there. And you can probably do searches on Facebook and Twitter as well. And definitely take some time and ask some questions, whether you're asking Valerie or ask me. We'll both be happy to answer questions. Today, if you feel we've earned it, please take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell and like the video. And we will catch you on the next one, folks. Bye for now.